Hey folks, today I'm going to be giving you a rundown of an introduction to myself, the course materials in terms of what we're going to be covering as part of this module, deliverables, and also some useful information that I think it's important to impart at this point in your careers. Yeah, so let's dig in. So my name is Alex. I'm an app developer that is based in Yorkshire. I've released 7 apps on the iOS App Store, which is approaching, has reached 2.5 million downloads. I've got 4 different projects in development, including one I'm developing for the UK Games Fund called Morse, which is a bit of a step away from what I conventionally make. And I also make a variety of unusual controllers using a piece of kit called a makey, which is like a chip which allows you to make controllers out of relatively basic materials. Here's just a quick preview of some of my work from 2019. Apologies. There we go. As nice as the music is, I can't turn it off because the mute button is blocked by the slide counter, so that's annoying. But yeah, so these are some of the projects I've worked on. Let me just kind of quickly wind back. So this was Shump. This is one of the projects I worked on more recently. Corporate Salmon was my second app I released. This is quite old footage of Break and Take. The actual final game's more polished. We'll cover that in one of the later lectures. And this is something I'm working on at the moment, which is called Shump. Yeah, so there's a variety of different projects I've worked on. I'm overdue an update in terms of showcase. I would definitely recommend if you have enough games to fill a 30-second showcase with, to do so, because it's a really nice way of demonstrating your projects. Yeah, so let's take a little quick recap. So in terms of where you're at in your careers, so as part of the class we did a poll as part of this, but if you missed the class, just take a moment to think about, at this point, like you've reached the midpoint in your careers, or in terms of your academic career, the halfway through the second year of university. Which is a tremendous achievement. Don't underestimate how incredible that is as a achievement at this point, considering how hostile it is in terms of a learning environment. For you lot, you will have had part of your first year in lockdown, and then you've had most of your second year, which will be in lockdown. So these aren't the best teaching environments to conducive for learning. So out of the gate, have a tremendous amount of respect for you all for managing to not only complete a university degree to the halfway point, but also learn how to learn in an independent environment beyond what university would usually provide you with. Having said that, you are at the halfway point, and what you need to do, if you haven't already, is to start having a good think about some basic questions in your career. And these are like what I would consider to be some of the bare minimum requirements to have a fighting chance when it comes to employability, when it comes to industry. So the 3 kind of very basic questions I would ask, they're a bit more abstract here, is have you finished more than one game? So, and what I mean by that is that, that can be something that has been developed through the course, but do you have something that is, you would feel, for example, comfortable selling, or something that you would be comfortable presenting to a potential employer? So no kind of placeholdery bits, something that is like polished and, a piece of work that you're proud of, that you'd feel comfortable showing to an employer or selling. Second thing is have you participated in more than one game jam? The reason I say more than one is because, again, like, I imagine there will have been game jams organised through the university, but to just do one game jam in 3 years is like pretty. It's a pretty low bar. Like, I know of universities, and I know of organisations and groups, even college students, um, that have done multiple game jams during their tenure or um, their time at the institution. Um, and yeah, it's just becoming more and more of a norm. I myself, I mean, I'm a bit of a fringe example, but I've done over like 30 game jams. But a lot of those happened whilst I was at university. And the third question is, do you have more than one connection to industry? And by that, I mean, do you have a contact in industry, obviously relevant to, what you're wanting to get into, that you're in direct communication with. So rather than, let's say, someone's asked in class, like a parasocial relationship with a YouTuber, or a streamer who is a developer. So you're not in direct contact with them. You can't ask them for help. You just get vague help from them, on more general stuff. Someone who can look at what you're doing, take their experience, and impart knowledge to you for reference. Um, that is important. And the reason I've said more than one connection in industry is, and this one is, on the presentation it's a little bit more dire, in terms of anyone, but I think it's important to have more than one connection, because you shouldn't be taking, and this is a rule that I try to stick to myself, and I will encourage you to keep in mind, not only for my classes but for all your classes and beyond, is never take, and again, absolutes, I try to avoid absolutes, but this is a pretty solid one, is always get another person's advice on an issue that you're having, just because everyone's career path has been like shaped by certain events, certain privileges, certain stuff that you're not necessarily going to know from just a 5-minute conversation with them. So getting a couple of different perspectives will kind of give you a better, more rounded idea of how to follow your career path. Yeah, so those are the 3 questions that I would say you need an answer for before you finish university, and arguably before you start your placement, or if you're trying to go for a placement. I would aim for accomplishing these by the end of the year. And that might sound like quite a high bar, but you've been on the course for a year and a half. You should have something that, some kind of project that you could polish up to make into a portfolio piece, and you've got opportunity in the remainder of this term to make something that could be portfolio worthy. You've got time. You've got me as a conduit in terms of being able to reach out to contacts, and there's lots of opportunities online for doing game jams. We'll get into that a little bit later, because there's one in particular that's coming up that I would strongly recommend you all get involved with. Something important to think about is what your competition is, and the state of the industry. So I'm not going to run through these. You can kind of go read through them in your own time. But there is a lot of competition out there, particularly in the current climate, where our industry has been less affected by it. But you still have to keep in mind that on a yearly basis, hundreds of students, possibly even thousands. I can't verify. I would assume thousands graduate from universities from games design and games programming courses, looking for jobs in industry. And then what you also have to factor in is that there will be students that still haven't found work from previous years who are also still looking for work. And this just compounds with more and more people. And then there's the terrifying march of, I've taught in the past students who were like 7 or 8 years old, who within a 3 week incubator period, so like, a 3 week incubator program, built a game in that period of time. So 7 or 8. So 10 years from now, they're going to be going to college with significantly more practice than you or I will have had from that early age. So you really have to think about like that you're up against a tremendous amount of competition. And as is listed there, I am technically your competition as well. If you'd, for example, applied for UK Games funding last year, I would have been going up against you. Obviously we are aiming for very different things, but it is pretty competitive in terms of getting stuff in industry. So, as I'll go into, complacency really isn't an option. From an indie side of games development, I've been doing indie stuff for a number of years. There is a lecture that I have, which I'm not going to have as part of this material, but I am going to provide you with giving an insight into my career over the last 6 or so years. But in general, things are becoming a lot harder for indies. We're kind of past the honeymoon period by a significant margin. The App Store you used to be able to make hundreds of thousands of pounds on. Now it's hundreds of pounds on. Maybe you'll make a couple of thousand if you're very lucky to get an App Store feature. Generally, the storefronts are becoming more saturated. Publishers are becoming harder and harder to get funding through. It's a pretty toxic environment from consumers and people targeting developers. And it's a weird trend where if you look on Google, you can see that the actual interest overall, the aggregate interest in indies, if you search for the term indie games, like it's reaching a point now where it's the long tail of interest, where it's very much dwindled to a point where there's not that kind of big exciting boost that existed around the time that things like Indie Game the movie and stuff like that, as that's long past at this point. From an industry perspective, there's, even though there is this pretty significant boom in the industry at the moment, even during COVID, there's the problem is that is predominantly fueled by exploitative methods for customers. So rather than raising the price point of the game, there's the options of loot boxes, microtransactions, which predominantly rely on exploiting a very small minority of vulnerable customers who are susceptible to gambling and basically draining them of money. There's been a lot of studios that have had pretty substantial abuse scandals, which has kind of plagued the industry for a good few years. And on top of that, there's in terms of the sexual harassment, and then there's people being overworked. A form of abuse, I guess, in terms of staff abusing the use of crunch. So usually in industry, so things like the film industry, crunch is like a designated period of time. Like, let's say you would negotiate with unions and say, we're going to crunch for 2 months and then that's it. But what you have in industry is what's known as perpetual crunch, which is where, like with something like CD Projekt Red, crunch can go on for years. Or in the case of something like Rockstar, their CEOs openly bragging about their staff having 100-hour work weeks, which is just disgusting. And yeah, I've been in the industry for 10 years now, and at this point now, I'm starting to see friends, some leaving industry. I've seen quite a decent number of them leave industry, but of the ones that stayed, you're starting to see chronic illnesses coming through. So things like high blood pressure, obesity, chronic stress, lots of kind of illnesses emerging from a decade of very very intense work in industry. And yeah, it's an ongoing problem, and it's something that needs to be factored in. And yeah, there are problems that are pretty inherent and toxic in the industry that aren't going to be addressed anytime soon. Yeah, so I'm painting a pretty bleak picture, but I think it's important for you to understand these things, because if you just coast through this course, if you do the bare minimum to make it from module to module, you're going to find it very difficult when you graduate to make that transition to being employed. And ultimately, you've spent a tremendous amount of money attending this course, so you have to make this count. Hoop jumping, as it says, isn't going to cut it. Obviously, this is a pretty, we've started the year in a pretty bleak position already with everything that's happened. But, and obviously this is a pretty doomer stance. And so you might be wondering why I'm telling you this. And ultimately, this boils down to, like if you're in a position where you're kind of apathetic to the course, or you're just not putting your whole effort in, now is the time to do it, because ultimately, the further you get along in your careers, the harder that these things are going to be able to to improve. So this is where this module comes in. This isn't more a rule for all of your modules. You should consider all of your assignments not as a means of achieving a grade. Grades are great, but they're pretty arbitrary. Like, realistically, this is a vocational course. This is a course in which you're learning skills for industry, and ultimately, your employer is going to potentially be interested to see you've got a first or a 2-1. But the thing that's really going to draw their attention is what you've made and what you've done ultimately with the time that you've spent on the course. And this module is a really good opportunity to produce something that is entirely yours, so unlike Team Project, and showcases a very pure understanding of what they're potentially looking for. What's also nice about what I'm going to be getting you to produce, which is a mobile game, which we'll get into in deeper in a sec, is that when networking events eventually re-emerge, you'll be able to show these games to potential employers, by handing them the game. So rather than sending them a link to a game that they have to download, and then unzip and then check to make sure it isn't malware and then open, it's literally just, here's the game, immediately get into it, because it's going to be a very straightforward game, and you're talking about a couple of seconds for you to be able to have your employer exposed to your work. And then the other thing is as well, it's still a while off for you, but thinking about how you can tether yourself to the industry is really, really, really important. So, when you graduate, you're going to have like all of this structure that exists for you, like having assignments and deadlines and milestones and all this stuff. That's all going to evaporate, and you're going to be responsible for your career. And having something to tether you to the industry, so if you have a game that you've been working on that you can keep iterating on, that you can send out to playtesters, that you can get critical feedback from industry from, that you can take along to events, like that is a really, really, really useful thing for you to give you some level of continuation. in terms of my expectations, obviously, one thing I would say to preface this with is I completely understand that this is, again, not optimal, is a light way of putting it, for education right now. This is not a great means of learning. Like, you're you know, this is not, this environment is not conducive to education. So with that in mind, I'm going to try and help you in any way that I possibly can. But what I need from you is these kind of fundamental things, to help me to be able to do that. So the first one, which seems kind of obvious, but has proven to be elusive, is attendance. So I need you on a week-to-week basis to turn up to these sessions, because ultimately I can't help you unless you're not, unless you're here. And I understand that there are students, for example, I've had students before that have shifts, like have work that they have to do during lectures. So if that is you, please get in touch with me in advance, so I know that you are like, engaged with the module but just unable to attend the classes. So I know to help you and to give you the support that you need. And more broadly, I would like to be able to build like a rapport with you all, to be able to, the classes aren't just about me delivering the content. It's about me getting to know you all more, understanding what your career paths are, and then directing you towards people that I know in industry that can be like, oh, here's this person that I think can help you on your path to your career. If you don't turn up to the classes, I can't help you with any of that stuff. There's already one student in this class that I have directly connected with someone who they've been looking to apply for, which may have a pretty substantial influence on their career path. So like, I want to be able to facilitate that, and I can't if you don't turn up. So please, at the absolute bare minimum for this module, turn up to the classes, because in this current climate, I should be able to, in the classes, look at what you're doing and be able to kind of gauge where you're at and figure out whether you need to be picking up for slack or whether you can relax a little bit. And without you being in the classes, that's hard enough. But you not turning up to the Discord sessions is even more kind of problematic. So please turn up. The second one, initiative. This is kind of a pretty obvious one, but it's surprising how many times I will get people coming to me with questions that I've either covered in the lectures and they've not bothered to watch them, or that a basic Google search will solve, or whatever search browser you use. So please try to take some initiative first. There's a saying in like tech education, which is ask three then me, or I think it's like brain box something and then boss. So try ask a friend, try ask online, and if those avenues fail, then ask me. If you are struggling with something that you for example, personal, do feel free to come to me. But in terms of simple questions, so like blatantly obvious ones, like how do I update Unity, or how do I download a package, I don't need to have answers like that spammed at me by all the students. I'll help where I can, but it's ultimately you need to be thinking about how you can, like, again, thinking towards that graduation, that there will be a point where I'm not able to help you with your education. So like taking initiative now and learning how to search for stuff online, and debug stuff independently is a really, really useful skill. And also, when it comes to employment, being able to do that independently, you're not going to be able to have your employers hold your hand all the time with this. So it's an excellent skill to be able to build. This next one is kind of a bit more, I'm basically going to be setting you weekly tasks, which kind of takes the elements of the module and then kind of like evenly distributes them across 12 weeks to make them a lot more deliverable and a lot more straightforwards. Whilst I don't expect you to have a build from week 2, for example, or week 1, you know, probably week 3 or 4, I am expecting to see something from. You know, so showing up with a build would be really useful. What I would say is if you don't have a build, please do not be like, oh no, I've not got a build, so I'm not going to turn up. I'm never going to like lambast you or anything like that. You know, I'm not. I don't want to punish you. I just want to help you. So if, you know, let's say we get to week 4 and you haven't turned, you don't have a build, and you decide to bail on the class because you're anxious. I don't want to appear like this boogeyman. I just want to kind of, you know, I want to be able to help you. And yeah, as part of that, tell me if you're struggling. It's surprising how many students leave it till last minute to just kind of, you know, week 11 or week 10 and tell me, oh, I'm struggling. I've not been able to get any work done for the last 8 weeks. Like, at that point, there's very little that I can do. So, like, being honest with me as sooner rather than later is crucial, because I can't help you unless I know you're in trouble. And then this last one, this is kind of like, there's not really any excuses for this one. So having backups of your work at this point is absolutely crucial. So the projects that you're going to be working with are going to be tiny. So realistically, you should not be having a situation where you can't back up your work on a regular basis. It's pretty industry standard. You know, you should be backing up your work on a regular basis. If you lost work in industry because you're not backed up your work, you'd probably face some kind of disciplinary, you know, or even be fired, if depending on how substantial the work is. You know, there's stuff like Mediafire, OneDrive. I think as part of, you know, the university, you get a huge chunk of storage. So make use of those things. And back up your work on a regular basis, because I won't accept, like outright, I will not accept it if people say that they've had their work corrupt and have lost it. There's too many places that you can back up your work where it's not a problem. So let's dig into the actual contents of the module itself. We've gone over quite a bit of stuff up to this point, and I appreciate your patience. So I mentioned before that this is a mobile project. You know, you're going to be building what's known as a hyper-casual game. Some of you will be familiar with that term, some of you won't. But in essence, it's you know, a game for the kind of casual mobile market, which kind of distills the elements of the casual market down to kind of almost like its purest form. We'll get into it a little bit more in a sec. But as part of that, we'll be building for Android, not iOS. That's predominantly because the export process for iOS is horrific, which you will go into later in the term. An APK is incredibly straightforward, particularly from Unity. And as part of that, you know, this APK that you're going to be giving me, the project needs to be optimized, you know, a reasonable size. I'll get into that as well. And making sure that your project is well formatted and well structured. And then as part of that, in relation to the module, you know, UI and UX are going to have pretty prominent features in this, and, you know, in terms of the grading, are going to be you know, pretty heavy weighted elements of it. And then at the end of the project, oh, and just to clarify, with the Unity version, this just needs to be verified to, you know, this is I would say the minimum Unity version that you need to be using to use the tools that we need to access. I believe the university is on 2020 something. So I'll bob that in the comments for what that is. And yeah, then the other element of it is a report, which we'll get into a little bit later, that basically, like, at the end of the assignment, with maybe like 2 or 3 weeks to go, once you should have the bulk of the work done on it, reflecting on the development process, you know, and how you've iterated on the UI and UX as part of that experience with playtesting. And yeah, as I'll go into later as well, Monday, April 8th, 26th is the date of submission. So that's quite nice for me because then I get for my birthday a bunch of mobile projects to mark, so that'll be fun. Okay, so hyper casual game. So hyper casual game is a game which often will have very minimal barrier to entry in terms of access to gameplay. So you're looking at experiencing the gameplay within probably the first 10 to 15 seconds of opening the app, if not sooner. Very, very simplistic mechanics. So, probably no more than 3 inputs on screen. Most of the time, you're looking at probably 1 input. High level of accessibility, and in terms of the UI, the UX, you're designing something that is very accessible for a mainstream audience. High replayability, so lots of procedural elements, and quality UI and UX, and yeah, it's hyper casual games are quite heavily geared towards retention, which is about how to keep people engaged, and they're kind of the distillations of engagement on mobile. So yeah, how you might be asking now, is this related to UI and UX? You might want to be designing I don't know, the the UX, or sorry, the UI for a first person shooter, and looking at this and being like, well how is this going to facilitate that? And for me, this module, the hyper casual element, like, this is like, I would argue, the purest essence of UI and UX design. Like, the mobile market is very, very fickle. Having spent multiple years working in it, incredibly fickle in terms of users, of whether people accept your game or not. From the moment the player opens it, they are judging whether to delete your app or not, because it's free and it's essentially worth nothing to them. So your menus and UI and UX, user experience, has to feel phenomenal. So it's a perfect case study, or a perfect practice run to get your skills up to speed. It as part of it as well, it is going to require you to kind of go beyond the kind of conventional games market and do a little bit of research, and share your game with people beyond the course. One of my biggest gripes with university courses, this isn't just Anglia Ruskin, is often it will just be internal testing. So it'll be just testing amongst members of the course, and ultimately most of you will have pretty high experience with games development, and as part of that, high experience with playing games. So as a result, you're gonna have a problem getting some kind of balanced feedback from people. So you really need to branch out to other people, to get this stuff play tested, and make sure that it is appealing to a mainstream market. The other thing is, as well, is that the scope of the project is pretty limited. So I want you to be designing something that can be produced in a very, very short period of time. I'll be going into that at the end of the presentation. Realistically, you want something that you can produce very quickly and then iterate upon. This is about taking something, building it, real scrappy, getting all the functions, working right, and then handing it to people, seeing what they think of it, iterating on the UI, making it look better, iterating on the user experience to make it more streamlined, and then repeating the process. I want this to be probably done twice at least for this project, so that you have something distilled rather than just the first pass. which is again something that universities don't do enough to discourage. Like, you shouldn't be shipping in terms of, you know, submitting something that has only had a first pass of polish to it. And finally, in terms of the scope, if you were designing something for, let's say, a first-person shooter, you know, it requires you to have a first-person shooter to test the UI in. And unless you're going to invest a tremendous amount of effort into designing a first-person experience, you're not going to have access to that. Otherwise, from a portfolio perspective, you're going to have some Unity placeholder, Unity or Unreal placeholder environment, which is just going to look naff. It's better to have something that is smaller, distilled, and you can focus your you know, UI and UX to an absolute maximum. So, in terms of deadlines, you know, again, it's 26th of April. Most of this information you already know. You know, just give that a quick read through. The only things I'd mention is, on top of this, just make sure that you should have already experienced this as an issue, but like, please make sure that you submit well in advance and that you check your builds. I just want to emphasize this again, because currently I'm going through people's projects for you know, marking from the last semester, and I am like dealing with lots of students who have, you know, botched a submission, and what that means for me is I have to chase up people to get, you know, resubmissions. I have to, you know, track down files. I have to, you know, I have to deal with the fact that people have like corrupted sections of the projects. Like, it's just a very miserable experience. And ultimately, what you don't want is for me to be going into your project to market, having spent, you know, up to days, which has happened for me, trying to track down people's work, because then it sets like a ridiculously high bar in terms of the amount of effort I've invested into marking your project. That, you know, if your project's rubbish, it's going to be a big disappointment for me, and yeah, it wastes my time, you know, and I would much rather be spending the time like giving you the marks you deserve, rather than dealing with, you know, admin issues. So please give yourself plenty of time to get the submission done, and also these files are very small, so you can feasibly play test this on someone else's machine, you know, someone else on the course, to make sure that, you know, the submission runs. Figure out a buddy system where, like, you know, ask someone on the course if they'll check your submission, and then you check their submission. And when in doubt, contact me when it comes to the submission, and make sure that your submission is correct. Because, as I said, it's I find it very upsetting when simple mistakes are made that cost you entire grade boundaries of marks because you've submitted stuff wrong. So the rubric is broken down into several bits. So you can see that the UI and UX have like a pretty substantial chunk as part of it. You know, gameplay and aesthetics are mentioned as part of these, but it's pretty heavily weighted towards the user experience, and you know, UI is part of that. These are some kind of basic requirements. So the only one that is kind of, well, there's two that are contentious. So the 15 megabyte limit, that is, I would say, like, it is pretty damn low to be able to get that. Like, in some cases, like, that is the default for people's certain projects. So I would say between 15 to 30 megabytes is the limit. 30 megabytes is probably a bit more generous, but what I wanted was to set a low bar so people aim for it, rather than just kind of, you know, adding stuff in the project and then just submitting something that's, you know, oversized. Because again, when you're going to be giving this to employers and publishers, you want it to be as quick to download as possible and quick to install on their machines. The other one, which is a little bit contentious, is this here, which is basically that I want you, the majority of you, to build 2D games, and the reason for that is that it might not feel like it, but 3D exponentially adds complications to projects. It is much easier to build a 2D game, significantly easier than it is to build a 3D game. Having said that, though, I haven't taught you all before, so I have no gauge of your skill and experience, or your work ethic, for one. So if you are going to build a 3D game, you need to pitch it to me before you do that. You cannot start working on a 3D game without my permission, because ultimately, and this has been reflected in students that submitted on the previous project, the ones that ignored my advice and went for it have failed, in that they have got something that is half finished and not fully polished, and were plagued with problems in terms of implementing it. And these were final years. So please, unless you're in a position where your 3D skills are better than your 2D skills, and you have a way of proving that, talk to me about it, and we'll decide whether that is a path that is feasible. The only other thing I want to mention as part of this as well is I don't want any infinite runners as part of this submission. So that's just because, again, I'm thinking towards from a portfolio perspective. Unless your infinite runner is just absolutely breathtakingly good, it's not gonna stand out, and it's probably gonna look crap. Like it's pretty brutal, but it's the equivalent of having Flappy Bird in your portfolio, which is a joke. An employer's probably just gonna close your application there if that's the case. So in the breakdown of the submission, you've got these various elements. You've probably had enough time to read those on the other side, but I'll just give you a sec to kind of a quick look through those. The only thing I'd mention is, at this point, some of you, the only piece of information that isn't on here is that some of you might not be in a position to have access to Android devices. So for those people, I would recommend getting access to the emulator. So the Android Studio emulator should allow you to facilitate that, and then start reaching out to people as soon as possible to get play testers. It kind of emphasizes the importance of play testing. Find people who have Android devices, and get a group of play testers. I'm pretty receptive in terms of play testing stuff on a week-to-week basis. So if you are really struggling, I'm happy to play test your work. But you shouldn't just be having this project sit in Unity for the majority of the module. You should be play testing on devices if you can. So the actual report, I'll go a little bit more into depth with that. So at the end of the project, you'll essentially write a report, and this is going to be kind of oriented around the development process that you've done for creating the UI and the user experience. And what I want you to do with this is, rather than just, I want you to kind of use examples of design that have kind of inspired your project. Citing, in a proper academic format, things like, I don't know, if we use an example of something like flow theory, so the process of engagement as part of balancing anxiety and apathy, or boredom and challenge and skill. Talking about what design theory has inspired you as part of this, and the other thing is as well, there's the academic side, and then there's also from a market side of things. So, you know, pointing to things like, oh, I saw in this game they had, you know, these elements. Like, what is the industry doing in terms of polish? Like, what elements can I inherit and, you know, have inspire the project? This is 1,000 words, um, and you know, to accompany that, you're also going to have a section explicitly on playtesting. So the only way for you to get these marks for these 10 marks, which represent a grade boundary, you know, 10 marks, is if you take part in playtesting. And as part of this, you need two iterations of playtesting. One is probably like the absolute bare minimum, but you're not going to score well on this section. And again, it's going to be to the detriment of your product if you don't get multiple iterations of testing in. So, yeah, as part of that, you'll have the evidence of the playtesting, so written feedback, and then you'll have a kind of a summary or a digest of what that feedback, you know, what that feedback was, and then how you integrated it into your projects. Yeah. So why is it important for you to kind of engage with this stuff now? Some of you will have already experienced this through lockdown, but you know, when university ends, it can be quite an isolating experience, and you know, it is much harder for you to motivate yourself to do these things once you've graduated. So, you know, and another factor of it is that ultimately you're putting yourself into debt. If you can make that investment worth it by, you know, working really, really hard on this stuff, but also working kind of smart. So like making sure that you're not just doing modules for the purposes of, you know, getting a grade, that you're tuning your content every single assignment towards how can this get me a job. You know, and as part of this, you know, we're here to facilitate that, and you know, we'll help you at every step of the way that we can to help you get a job in industry. You just need to engage with us, because ultimately, when it comes to after university, this is something that a lot of people don't talk about. This is something I experienced myself, and a lot of people I speak to in industry experience a similar thing. Is when you graduate, it, you know, stigma is a lot more prominent than it is when you're at university. When you're at university, you can take, you know, you can study whatever you fancy, and you know, there's some level of kind of distinction to that. People will, you know, be fine with it. And when you graduate, the questions become, well, now what are you gonna do for work? You know, how are you going to afford to live? You know, how are you going to pay the bills? When are you going to get a real job? And that is very, very hard to keep yourself motivated to learn and to keep working when there's the pressure of bills, and you know, the pressure from wider society wanting you to get employment. So, you know, keep in mind that you have access to, even in these current situations, a tremendous amount of equipment, resources and materials. You've got access to a reciprocative, I can't pronounce that word, a labour market that will reciprocate labour. So what I mean by that is, you know, I've worked with musicians before when I was at university. That for them, working with me on games projects meant that they had portfolio pieces that they could take to industry, and then the same was true for me, that I had games that I could, you know, have as part of my portfolio. And you know, if I use a local example for you, one of my mates, Julian, he attended, you know, game jams, and basically he was a music production student, and he built kind of soundtracks for all of the projects at this game jam. So he'd go around to like 4 or 5 teams and make soundtracks for them over the space of 2 days. And yeah, he absolutely, you know, was an incredibly useful skill to, you know, build up as part of that experience. And now he works at Jagex as one of their main kind of musician, musical producers, which is incredible. And keep in mind that often, you know, audio people have just as much enthusiasm as you for games, uh, and don't really have a means of communicating with you lot. So reaching out and collaborating is just a really, really great means of, massively improving the production value of your project and making contacts that will stick with you well into the future. One of the musicians that I worked with, Luke, we have worked together for a decade now. He worked on my first project, Narcissus, back in 2010, and now I'm able to pay him to work on my current project, Morse. So it's really, really important to collaborate with people and enhance your portfolio pieces with their collaborations. And even though things are difficult right now in terms of being able to access and see people, there is still a pretty vibrant tech community in Cambridge. And what you have as a benefit is that your skill set is more oriented towards programming. So, you don't just have to consign yourself to games. You've got the ability to network with kind of the wider tech community, and potentially get work in or contacts in lots and lots of different entities and areas. And people move between different studios, and if you make these contacts at these studios, then you'll start to kind of get around and get to know people. Even though I mentioned before that like a lot of these markets have stagnated and things are difficult, this is coming back to what I talked to at the beginning. Like the problems that I highlighted, these are the inverses of them. So, even though the markets are saturated and have stagnated, they've never been easier to get onto. When I started building games, like Steam had about 30 games on, so like it was very much a walled garden. You now have access to those markets. This next one I'd give with a caveat that like, there are people that, for example, on this course who don't have as much time as necessary, either because they've got people to care for, or because they've got jobs that they have to sustain themselves with. But for those of you that do have the time, don't squander it now. Use it to your absolute advantage to build the stuff that you want to build. Like, I speak to a huge number of people in industry that like wish that they'd utilize their time at university better to build the projects they wanted to, because having to build something to the profit motive and take huge losses to produce a commercial project, like the current project I'm working on right now, I'm thousands of pounds money down the hole that I still need to make up with in terms of profit, and that might not even materialize. So when you're at university, you don't have to worry about the profit motive, and that massively frees you to make whatever the hell you want. And yeah, tools are very accessible and free. And one thing to keep in mind is that like, whilst you may be able to graduate from university, get a degree, ultimately, of the people that I went to university with, the ones that have actually persisted and stayed in industry are the ones who attended networking events outside of the university, that built games in their own time and attended game jams. Like the people who just kind of coasted through the course, they're working in other professions now, unrelated to the industry that they paid thousands of pounds for, for essentially zilch. And one thing to keep in mind with as well, is that even of those people that did get into industry, some of them have still left at this point. I've had quite a few friends in recent years, either pivot to education or pivot to other kind of parallel industries, things like that. So, even the best of them don't necessarily stick around. Keep in mind that you're a games developer now, and with that mind, act like it. Attend industry events. Obviously, that is much easier said than done. But having said that, there is, on the next page, as you'll see, there is a careers fair event, which I would definitely recommend you get involved in. Definitely take part in game jams. So this week coming up now, in a couple of days, the global game jam will begin, and this is going to run, from midweek through till the weekend. If you haven't done it before, it's a really, really good opportunity to, kind of get involved in games development. So itch.io. So if I search for jams, like these are all the game jams that are happening right now. Like, there's a lot of them. There is a tremendous amount of them. So I think it might be listed on here. Global game jam. Oh, so some of them are like the actual locations. So you can see there's different location sites. But yeah, like even if you miss something like the global game jam, there's just loads of little events to get involved in. So this one was one I spotted last time when I did the presentation that looked cool. So this is the Nokia 3310 game jam, where it's designing a very small, minimalist game to essentially run on, in a 2-color palette within specific constraints. And yeah, keeping things very constrained to, you don't obviously need it to run literally on the device, but designing with that constraint in mind. Yeah, like stuff like that. What else is there? Finally finished something. It's the Toy Box Jam. Cool. So, yeah, there's loads of different challenges and opportunities. Yeah, and these things are constantly running. Global game jam's a really good one to get involved in because it's like such a prolific event. And again, when you talk to employers, being able to say like, I've been involved in these game jams before, it shows that you're kind of taking initiative and you're getting involved in these things. So, as I said before, treat every assignment as an opportunity, a portfolio piece, and where you can, reach out to studios and try to make contact in industry. And ask me whether I have any contacts that I can recommend you to, because having someone that either not necessarily can mentor you, but that you can talk to for advice. There's so much that you can learn from industry that you just don't learn at university. So yeah, when obviously things get back to normal, Cambridge Game Devs is a really good event to get involved in. There's like monthly meetups which are quite nice. You get a pretty good turnout, and it's good to kind of make those like local connections early on, because again, people can kind of point you in different directions of people in industry. Tech and beer is more of like a broad industry event, kind of related to tech, free pizza and free beer, and then kind of hosted at things like Amazon and lots of the business park and things like that. And then for regional stuff, there's an event called Game Anglia, which they kind of run a variety of different stuff for like the kind of greater region. These are all great things to get involved in. Beyond that, again, when things kind of get back to some degree of normality, you've got things like EGX, Women in Games, Insomnia, Now Play This, like lots of these big events going on that you can kind of get involved in. Quite a number of them still have online stuff this year, and interestingly, are free in a lot of cases, where people have basically just gone for the online model, where you've got like industry talks that are like accessible that otherwise would just be like at the event. So there's a real good opportunity to kind of get involved with this stuff. One that's coming up that I think might be quite interesting to you lot, that I would strongly encourage you to get, to look into, is Games Careers Week. This is kind of coming up. I think it's for March time, and that's like a whoops. That's like a an event which, if I just quickly click on, I love that it loads in Comic Sans initially, but you know, there's lots of different stuff going on here. You can see that there's career talks, portfolio pitch events, so you can, get your portfolio tested by people in industry and see that it's, whether it's up to scratch or not. Loads and loads of stuff to get involved in. Yeah. So, yeah, and then the only other thing I'd potentially recommend, this kind of comes with like a kind of warning that obviously the platform is pretty toxic, and it can be a massive waste of time in terms of like if you don't use it in a professional capacity, you can end up sinking lots of time into it. But I find in terms of contacting people in industry and kind of striking up conversations, if you use it in a pretty kind of almost surgical manner, Twitter is a really good platform for being able to reach out for people rather than having to go through HR departments. Yeah, and you can get pretty specialized in terms of getting in touch with people. So you could search for Ubisoft UI or something like that, and you'd probably find someone in that department that you could maybe drop a message to. Obviously, they're not entitled to give you their time. So if you message someone and they don't respond, don't be an asshole about it. They're probably just busy. But yeah, it's a good way to strike up conversations, and in the absence of stuff happening, stuff happening in public and in person, that might be a good alternative. The only thing I would say is if you are going to do that, liked with something like the equivalent of LinkedIn, I would set up a professional account rather than using one that you've, for example, been using for like shit posting or something like that. Probably not a great idea. Yeah, and then the only other thing I just want to quickly mention is like make sure I've covered a lot of very intense stuff, and I appreciate you sticking around. This industry is very, very intense, and it's not a sprint; it's a marathon. Like you need to sustain yourself. If you don't look after yourself, like the number of years that you will be able to work in games will dramatically reduce. If you rely on energy drinks and crap, your diet's crap and you don't exercise, like you've really got to look after yourself. Yeah, and I'd say definitely if you can try get a decent sleep schedule because that can, I admittedly when I was at university I used to do a lot of kind of late night stay ups, but when it came to things like game jams, for example, I'd never do overnight. I'd always sleep and then I'd come back refreshed the next morning. Yeah, and then one other thing that is like quite a nice little tip that I'd recommend is get a water jug. Um, so I just find that just having really chilled, water is really nice, just for being able to get up periodically and just have like something refreshing that isn't an energy drink. These seem like might seem quite kind of condescending, but like honestly, I just feel like compelled to say it because there's just so many friends of mine that have in their late 20s who have like chronic issues, or people beyond that who are having much more substantial issues. So you really need to make sure that you look after your well-being, because ultimately, if you want to be in this industry for the long haul, you know, your body is the vessel in which you inhabit the industry. Um, a final plea. I am here to help you. I have 1 hour office hour a week. Let's try it again. I have one office hour a week in which to help you in. The traditional state schedule, as you probably will know, is that like there is a designated time a week in which you can book me. In this current climate, I want to be able to help you as much as possible at any time, within reason. So pretty much throughout the week, I will be kind of having Discord open in the background. If you contact me in advance, and that is the big caveat, if you contact me in advance with a problem or needing help, I am able to facilitate that. My constraints are weekdays and between 9 and 6. I'll make some exceptions sometimes for weekends, but again, you will need to contact me in advance on that. Don't just contact me, 1 a.m. in the morning on Sunday night or something like that. Plan stuff in advance so I can help you. And realistically, I've been working here a number of years now, and I'd probably say the use of my office hours consists of around between probably 10 to 20%. It's very frustrating. I find ways to utilize it in terms of like spending more times after the sessions, but very few students come to me for help, and very often students have problems with the submissions that would have been resolved in talking to me. So do take that initiative and make use of my office hours. The easiest way to do that is just get in contact with me via Discord. Just contact me sooner rather than later. Okay, again, thank you so much for waiting through this, because I know it was a pretty long session. What to do for next week? So I want you, with the rubric and everything, the brief in mind, is to do a little bit of research. So it doesn't need to be anything written down. I mean, maybe you'd want to make notes for yourself, but if you aren't savvy to what a hyper-casual game is, do some research, see what there is out there in terms of hyper-casual games, whether that's watching videos or downloading hyper-casual games and having some fun. And then once you've kind of got a gauge for the market, what's out there, come up with a game come up with 3 games, and aim for less than 3 inputs, or 3 inputs or less. Something that can be explained in an elevator pitch. So in a very brief period, if you imagine you're in a elevator with the CEO and you have 10 seconds to explain your pitch, something very concise to explain, and then scoped to something that you could feasibly finish in the space of a week. That's really, really important, because you need to have at week 6 something that is play testable, and functional, that can run on a device. So if you think about that, you need to have something that you can build in a week, so then you can polish and iterate from there. Get the gameplay functioning maybe in the space of a week or 2, and then making sure that the UI for the start screen, for the menu, for the game over, is cohesive and connected and functional. And keep in mind Android for the platform. So think about the scales of devices, where your thumbs are going to be on the screen, things like that. How you're going to hold the device, and making something that isn't going to be ridiculously processor heavy, so it won't run. If you haven't, I think one of my main pieces of advice to any kind of people I work in industry is to get a notebook. I have been filling up notebooks for over a decade at this point. I've probably got, I'd say, over 50 notebooks of information and knowledge. Happy to share some links to articles I've written about it in the past, just to save some time. But it's just a really good way to offload knowledge, and also to kind of log information. So I come back to ideas 5 or 6 years down the line, and pick them back up and keep working on them. It's just a really good way to clear some brain space. So and again, remember with the ideas, no infinite runners. 3D, you need to run by me first before you pick it. And also, the other thing I'd say is, if you have one really awesome idea, or one idea that you've just been dying to build, please just make another 2, just so I've got something to. Because what I don't want is for me to, you to come with your completely overscoped idea, me to shoot it down, and then for us to just awkwardly sit in silence when we realise that you don't have anything else to show me. So do come up with a couple of backup ideas, just to kind of weigh up against the your main concept. Yeah, so that's everything. Thank you so much again for your time, and I really look forward to seeing what you're going to produce, and look forward to working with you too. Yeah, let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to kind of bob them in the chat or Discord, and yeah, let's make some apps.